Good morning, John Adamson with Seeking Light. So my thumbnail is going to be a forehead, but that's okay. I just felt like talking about this topic today. It's not politics. It's not related to faith. I kind of hate using the term religion. There's lots of religions in the world, but having a faith in the one true God who manifested himself through his Son in the flesh to live and die and resurrect among us, that's a different matter. But I want to talk about cars. I don't know why. I just thought about this. Well, I know why I thought about this. So I have lots of video feeds that come to my YouTube channel, and one of them is this channel that talks about the fact that car sales are down significantly right now. During the pandemic, it was getting really hard to find cars. There were dealerships that were just literally gouging their customers with ridiculous over MSRP asking prices. Ford apparently was very egregious. Ford dealerships were being criticized because they'd be selling Ford F-150s for $20,000, $30,000 above MSRP. You know, if you've ever bought a new car, and I've been that route in the past, you know, usually MSRP is the starting point, and then you talk the dealer down from there, unless it's a highly desirable car where, you know, you can't get any money off of it. But Ford was particularly bad about that, and there were some other dealership networks across the United States were just gouging their customers. And now that production's ramped up and computer chips are available for these vehicles because everything's highly computerized these days, now you're starting to see a lot of vehicle availability. Well, this channel that I follow is chronicling how all the big three automakers, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, are having a hard time moving vehicles now, selling vehicles. And part of the problem is simply just cost. The average cost of a vehicle in the United States, I believe, is approaching $50,000 for a new vehicle. $50,000, that's average for all new vehicles sold. Part of the problem is Americans themselves. And you may have noticed this if you pay even remote attention to what's going on from a new car perspective, but there's hardly any sedans anymore. You know, cars like this. SUVs by far outstrip the rest of the market. I want to say it's like 70 to 80% market share. It's really high SUV to other types of vehicles. And the number one selling vehicle in the United States has been for some time the Ford F-150, so a full size, and we're talking, you know, the full size trucks of today are large vehicles. So when you couple those things together, large vehicle size, and then you couple that with the power requirements of the typical American these days, you know, wanting high power, it's a recipe for high gas, but it's also a recipe for greater complexity of the vehicle, which is going to add to the cost of the vehicle. And then you add on top of that government regulations for new vehicles, like for instance, a few years ago, mandating the backup camera on vehicles. That is now mandated in new vehicles. Having some kind of warning crash detection system. All of these electronics add on, and then if you've been in a modern vehicle, I'm talking within the last few years, every one of them has touch screen now. Some of them are all just touch screen in terms of controls, no physical buttons. And while some people will say, well, that'll reduce your materials cost, it adds a lot of complexity. And because so many of these systems are integrated with each other, if one system fails, it can impact the functionality of another. For instance, a mechanic that I know was telling me that in modern cars, a lot of them have braking systems where if you want to go change the pads and rotors, you have to go into the computer to get the caliper to release so you can actually access those things. Well, what happens if that system goes down? It's incredibly complex, over-engineered, and for understandable reasons. If you make something that requires expensive repairs, your repairmen at the dealerships are going to have more business, and dealerships are going to make more money. So I guess I would encourage you to consider buying used. Not only buying used, but buying a known vehicle for decent or good reliability that is much simpler from a mechanical standpoint, that's sold at high volumes. What do I mean by that? I mean, so you can actually go back, well into the 80s and find the most sold vehicles of that time. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is you can look to see if any of those cars are still on the road now. Now, obviously, you start going back into cars in the 80s, your selection of cars is going to be diminished. You'll probably find a lot of cars for sale from the 90s. So, looking for something like that from a brand or a make or a car model that's known to be, exceptionally reliable. So like generally you can be safe looking at old Toyotas, or even older Hondas, especially manual transmission Hondas from the 1990s. There might be the occasional gem from the big three automakers in the United States. So for example, the Ford Crown Victoria or Mercury Grand Marquis or Lincoln Town Car, they're all same platform vehicle with same engine powertrain. All of those from the 90s generally had especially mid to late 90s, had very reliable powertrains, and those are the cars you would generally associate with older time taxis and police cars. If you can find one that's been well maintained, well cared for, that's a very solid vehicle to own. So look for, and my main purpose in my video is to talk about saving money on cars, because of how ridiculous the prices are. The other thing about those big car platforms is that not many people tend to buy them. One, the driving experience is different, because they've got fairly big hoods and trunks, and they're a little bit wider, so you have to be more careful with things like parking lots and stuff like that. People tend to associate them with bad gas mileage, but frankly, my Volvo gets about the same gas mileage as one of those Ford Crown Victorias and all the sister platforms combined. They all get about the same, even though they've got bigger engines. Excuse me. So you look for that. Look for limited electronics. Electronics will chew up your capability of keeping up with the car repairs if they go bad. And so like this old Volvo from the late 80s, extremely simplistic. And frankly, not everything works. So for example, my radio is long dead. My air conditioning, which is not electric, it's got a compressor issue, is dead. But my windows work, my signals work, my windshield wipers work. So everything that needs electricity that I really need works in this car, and as well as heating, and I have heated seats on this. And so if any of one of those goes bad, for one thing, it won't cost me an arm and a leg to keep up with those things. Two, they're much easier to work on in this car because there's actually room to work when you remove the dash, and yeah, it's older and finding replacement parts might be hard, but it's not too bad. But I could talk about this subject for a long time, so I need to keep moving. So there's that. Plus, older cars, especially cars, not SUVs, people aren't looking for them as much. And so you can find decent deals on cars. Now, with the gas prices skyrocketing, you always see this happen. Used car prices go up, SUVs go down. Now we're in a little bit of a downward trend on the gas prices, so now you're starting to see car prices drop again, and SUV prices go up. And so, finding decent cars for decent money is becoming easier. Also, generally, if you have a good car that you maintain, and car maintenance is important. Part of the problem with people getting newer cars is they don't maintain them. They also listen to the manufacturer like about changing their oil like every 10 or 15,000 miles, which is ridiculous. You need to, change it much more often, even in modern engines, to keep the longevity of the engine. Just doing things like fluid changes, checking your tire pressure, things like that, not driving your car crazily. You can extend the life of your car, and it'll become cheaper, especially with an older car that doesn't have fancy electronics, to keep it on the road rather than going out and buying a new car, generally. Because if you buy a new car, your payment is going to be astronomical. If you're buying a $50,000+ car, you're going to have over $1,000, depending on what your down payment is, you're going to have over $1,000 per month down, payment. That's ridiculous. If you buy a used car like this, the Volvo, yeah, I've had some, concerning repairs. I got to do a suspension upgrade because it's well overdue. That's going to cost me about $700, but that is all suspension pieces on this because it's relatively simple to work on. Parts are still available, and there's a mechanic I know that's going to put them in for a decent price. But once that's done, that suspension will be good for the rest of the life of this car probably. But I have months where there's nothing wrong with this. I have no repairs, and I'm driving it probably, at least 1,000 miles per month. And because it's a Volvo and I keep the fluids going, yeah, it's got some quirks when it drives, but it's been reliable. So anyway, I would just want to make a video about that. Find a decent used car, or if you have your car already paid for, just maintain it. And I'm speaking as one who used to get the new car every 2 years. When I was an idiot guy coming out of school, I bought a brand new Ford Escort right out of school, which actually was a good car, get me great gas mileage, and being a 1991, it was very simple in terms of electronics, but it was reliable, great on gas, despite me beating the heck out of it. I kept that for a couple years, and then I got a Jeep Wrangler, and that was a great vehicle. I paid too much for back in that time, but it didn't get good gas mileage, but it was fun to drive, very reliable, and again, I beat it up. And then a couple years later, I got a Acura Integra, and that was a great car. It had good reliability, and I drove it like it was a sporty little car. And then I moved to used cars after that. And I've only had, since that time, 3 cars, I think, maybe 4 with car payments since the 90s. But most of the time I've owned my own vehicle. So anyway, different subject matter. I appreciate you jumping on. Maybe you could, if you think about it, tell your story about how you save money with cars and used cars, and what do you drive. I obviously drive this '89 Volvo 740. Yes, it looks terrible, but I really enjoy this car. I like this car a lot. It's quirky. It needs things done, but it gets me from point A to point B, and I just love the sound of that engine. It's like an old tractor. Anyway, hope you have a great day. Take care. God bless.